Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good morning. As children, we are taught to look for patterns. It is one methodology that educators use to help students to learn on their own. It's a fallacy, though, to think that looking for patterns develops anything more than an ability to find a pattern. It's a skill that might help us later in life to be able to determine where we left our keys, but it does very little to help us solve the world's problems. The reason is simple. Just because we're able to see a pattern doesn't mean we either know what that pattern means or that we have the ability to change that pattern, or that we might have any solution whatsoever to what we see is a common occurrence. It's easy to figure out how letters are grouped together in a word search. It's a simple game to play Boggle and discover words on the game that make up words. But don't get me wrong, I believe that there is value in these puzzles and word games. They're important. They have been proven by scientists to be able to maintain cognitive ability and remain mentally sharp. They're better than watching TV, and they're better than doing nothing at all. I enjoy them. I love a good word search, especially as a teacher. I like giving out word searches. It gives me a chance to get a little bit of a break. But my point is simple. While uncovering what appears to be a pattern may help sociologists falsely describe a societal phenomenon, it's the job of religion to ascribe meaning to patterns. And the task of the committed is to determine the value or the detriment of any given pattern. With that in mind, and given the fact that I have titled my sermon this Shabbat, Irreparable Damage, I'd like to present you with what I see as a pattern in this morning's Torah reading. I'd like to explain what I see as a pattern, and then we have to do the hard work in our own personal lives to change the patterns we see. Just because there is a pattern doesn't mean the pattern is good or bad. Patterns themselves are morally neutral. So I hope that you're following my introduction so far. So here are 5 different stories that appear in this week's Parsha. In order to really understand this morning's Torah reading, we need to take a bird's eye view. We need to step back and see what's truly going on in this morning's Parsha, and not focus specifically on one story. So here they are. You've read many of them already, and you know how I feel about Abraham. So the first story, messengers arrive to inform Abraham and Sarah that they're going to have a child. Sarah laughs because she can't believe Abraham at his old age could possibly father a child. Sarah lied, saying, "I didn't laugh," because she said she was frightened. But God replied, "You did laugh." Abraham gets insulted, and both God and Sarah lie to Abraham so that his feelings don't get hurt. Just as an aside, they name that child Isaac, which means to laugh. Can you imagine every time Abraham called out to his son Yitzchak, he was reminded in the very name that Sarah, his wife, had laughed at him. That's the first story. Abraham, in the second story, pleads on behalf of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, asking the critical question, Ha'af tiftzeh tzadikim rasha? Are you really going to kill the righteous alongside the evil? That is the equivalent of the student saying to the teacher, You're going to punish us all for something that one of us did? You're going to take away recess from all of us just because one of us did something wrong? Story number 3. Again, Abraham asks Sarah to make believe she is his sister so that no harm will come to them. And then Abraham is rebuked by the king in the exact same language that he was rebuked the first time he did this action. Ma'asita lanu umechatati lach ki eveta alai. Why did you assume the worst about us? Look at the terrible thing you have brought on us by making believe she was your sister and not your wife. Why do you lack all faith in humanity? Story number 4. Sarah instructs Abraham to get rid of Hagar and his first son Ishmael. And he does. It's almost the same as when he says to Sarah in the first place, Hagar is your maidservant, do with her as you'd like. And she drives her out of the house. At least in this story, Abraham gives her some food and some water. Finally, Abraham goes up the mountain under the instructions of God to sacrifice his son. And they go up together. The two of them walk together. But when the story is all over, it says, V'yashav Avraham el na'arav yakumu v'yachu yachdav el be'er sheva v'yeshev Avraham b'be'er sheva. That Abraham returned to his servants, and they departed together. He and his servants departed to go to Beersheba. Abraham is instructed to sacrifice his son. He goes up the mountain with him, and they don't return together. It leads some commentaries, of course, to believe that maybe Abraham actually went through with the sacrifice of his son, but we know that's not true. Abraham substituted the ram. But I would remind you that Isaac, at the moment of the story, is no little child. He is a grown adult. According to Rashi, he's already 30 years old. And so Ibn Ezra points out to us a very simple comment. They went up together, but they went their separate ways. After Abraham tries to sacrifice his son, Isaac says, I think you have destroyed our relationship beyond repair. You have done irreparable damage. Just in case you haven't seen the pattern that I was trying to telegraph in my telling, here's what I see. It's all about human interaction. Abraham and Sarah's relationship is a rocky one. At best, they're cordial to one another, but years of unreasonable demands on each other, moving away from family, struggling to have a child, resentment builds, and they just figure out how to cohabitate together. And if it isn't clear enough, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham's willing to defend the lives of others, but he neglects those closest to him. Again, Abraham asks Sarah, make believe you're my sister so I don't get hurt. And she complies, maybe because she just wants a reprieve from having to be around Abraham for a few days. Maybe she just needs a break, but you can see their relationship is completely broken. It seems as though the damage done of the years of the patterns is irreparable. In what appears to be an attempt to make up for her and for him, for Abraham knows he has done so much wrong, he concedes to getting rid of Hagar and Ishmael. Can you imagine how broken their relationship is? That Sarah asks of him to get rid of his son. Abraham concedes. There is no clear way out of this. And they have at that moment entered a new moment in their relationship. They've entered a new phase. I call it tit for tat. We know that in our own relationships, we do this all the time. Everything in some relationships is complete conditionality. You do this for me, I'll do that for you. You do that for me, I'll do this for you. I have to tell you, that is the marker of the least healthy relationship that can exist. Quid pro quo is maybe how it's called on the international front, but it cannot be the hallmark of our deep, necessary relationships. And we must ask ourselves, is this what we have arrived at in our marriages? Is it where we have come to in our relationships with siblings? Is it how we feel about our parents or our children? Have we reached a point of no return? Is the relationships that we are in for all intents and purposes already ended? So finally, you know the story of the binding of Isaac. They go down the mountain themselves, separated, irreconcilable differences between the two, irreparable damages between father and son. And if that isn't enough, the very next verse after this week's portion ends with the binding of Isaac is the death of Sarah. Abraham is unable to explain what happened that day. The commentary suggests that Sarah died because she heard what was going on. She died of a broken heart. Abraham should say, I wish it hadn't unfolded like this. Abraham should have seen the trajectory early. I wish he had seen where their lives were going. I wish he had seen the signs earlier and valued her, his wife, more. I'd pay anything to have you back, he should have said to Sarah. I have so many regrets he must have felt in his heart, but he couldn't get the words out. So that's the pattern I've seen this morning. So now what? It's not enough, as I said from the very beginning, to see the patterns. You have to do something to change it. The Torah, our sages, our tradition begs us to see the patterns and to change them. I hope you don't view this as an academic lecture. I would ask you, what other patterns do we see in the Torah? But that's not what we're talking about today. Today's plea is to see the patterns, not just in the Torah, but in our lives, to make a change before we make the same mistakes they made. Torah teaches us that we can have a better life. All we have to do is identify the pattern and then make the change. It's hard. It hurts. It requires us to go and put our egos in check, to go back further and do the hard work. But I tell you today, you can do it. We can do it. We can make a change. Maybe the patterns are so embedded. They're programmed from childhood. You know, when you get together with your siblings, you begin to act the same way you did as a child. But we have to change. If we got off on a wrong foot, then we need to change, because change is possible. Look, we could apply this message to any number of things, not just in our personal relationships, but in our world and in our country. But I have to be honest with you, when I wrote this sermon, I had no idea what the outcome would be. When I got here today, I was surprised to find out we still don't know what the outcome will be. But we can do the hard work of repairing. There is no such thing as irreparable damage if we can figure out what the pattern is. I know it sounds cliche, but past performance is no indication of future results. In this cancel society, formerly known as the disposable society, we can't just listen. We can't just disregard. We must figure out how to repair the damage. Otherwise, the only thing left is killing the relationships we desperately need, and we will be speechless when we regret their loss. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf, page 184. Zachatzi Kaddish, please rise.